through it. Welcome everybody. It's May 7th board meeting. Make up for the one that was canceled last week due to the storm. Thanks everybody for being here. I'd like to do a call to order. Starting to my left. Just a roll call.
Here.
Stan McLaughlin.
Sean Hayfall.
Adam Spice.
Madeline Seal.
And I believe we have somebody who on Zoom. Go ahead. Okay. So we have a quorum. Item 2, pledge of allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mission of ECS is to educate each student to high academic standards using innovative curricula that will foster knowledge, love, and respect for the environment and preserve it for future generations. We grow citizens. Our vision is that every ECS graduate will be an actively engaged citizen, driving thoughtful change in the world around them. I'd like to just move up one item here. Today we're voting on the candidacy on nomination of a potential member of our board, Julia Robinson. Julia here?
Yeah.
Actually, first I'd like to just open it up for any discussion if there's, I know everybody has received their nomination and their information, but if there is any discussion that we'd like to have before we vote.
I'll just make a comment that Dr. Robinson, for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting her yet, has a long experience with ECS. Was formerly the principal of the middle school here and is now a faculty member at Duquesne. And I think brings a lot of knowledge of the education world with her and specific knowledge of this school. Speaking strongly in favor of her candidacy here.
Thanks, Adam. Anybody else, any other comments or discussion? Great. Well, then I'm going to read the motion, and I don't know, Tanya, do you want me to change the number because I know we're taking it out of order? Okay. So it's a resolution 2025-04-2164. Be it resolved by the Board of Trustees of the school that it elects Dr. Julia Robinson as a member of the Board of Trustees to serve a term of 3 years. Do I have a motion? Motion. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, the motion passes. Thank you, congratulations. I think congratulations. If you'd like to come up, we can administer the oath. And you can have a seat with us if you'd like. Even wrote the words of the oath down. So I was prepared. So just ask you to raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear that I will support, obey, and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States and of this Commonwealth, and that I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity. Thank you. You're in. And now I know we have a number of people who have come to speak as part of our public comment. Just a few ground rules I'd just like to ask people who are here to speak, that we typically ask people to sign up in advance. So if you haven't signed up in advance, please at least let Tanya know. You're here. I ask people to keep it under 3 minutes if possible, and just for awareness, for anybody speaking, we're happy to, we want to hear your comments. We don't typically sort of respond or in the moment, other than to maybe ask questions. So that's normal. But I appreciate you being here. I'm just going to pull up my list here. I believe. And the first person on the list is Matthew Henry.
So save some paper. Hopefully you share.
That's our business.
Yeah. Just debating whether to go all. All right. Good evening, everybody. I really appreciate you taking the time to hear from all of us. I just want to start by saying thanks for all you do. I know the last couple of weeks with the power outages and things have been stressful for everybody in administration, and I want to acknowledge that. Thank you for all that. My third grader had a great time touring the Laurel Cabins today, and my seventh grader is really looking forward to going to Costa Rica next year. So lots of good stuff going on. Okay, so when my family learned about this plan to use PAD buses for middle schoolers next year, the first thing I thought of was, what's my daughter's house going to look like? She's seventh grade. So I plugged it into Google Maps and checked it out. But I'm a computer programmer. I like data. So I started to think, what's everyone's route going to look like? And as it happens, my wife works on the ECS, or the ECS directory every year. So it was very easy for her to give me a list of all the addresses that people agreed to publish in the directory, which represents about a third, about 100 out of the 300 middle schools. So I wrote some code to submit all those addresses to Google Maps. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about the facts I discovered by doing that. Okay, so if ECS middle schoolers had ridden PAD buses to school this morning, what would their trips have looked like? First of all, about a quarter would not ride the bus because they belong. And about another quarter would not ride the bus because they live outside the city limits. They get transportation from their homes. So that leaves us with half, 50%. About 10% of the overall population, so a fifth of that half, would have a direct route. They would get on the bus near their house, they would get off the bus here near the school. And about 40% of the overall school population, so the vast majority of the students who are riding PAD buses, would have transferred. And a few, about 3% of the overall student body would have two transfers. The other two interesting pieces of data that I thought were what are the routes that students would ride. So both in the morning and in the afternoon, the vast majority of students, about 25% of the student body, would be arriving on 71A in the morning and leaving on the 71A in the afternoon. And then, how long are the trips? Is the other interesting question. Most of the trips are about an hour long. There are a handful that are 80 or 90 minutes long, and the rest are under an hour. So all these numbers are in the printouts that I gave you. But in the afternoon, the picture looks very similar. About 40% of the student body is going to be riding a bus with a transfer. And about 69 students are going to be trying to get onto the 71A when it comes down next. It's a lot of students, right? It makes me kind of wonder what's going to happen if there aren't room for all of them. even a bendy bus, one of the big bendy buses only has 60 seats on it. The normal size buses have about 40 seats. So I hope this data helps, put some numbers behind what I'm sure are going to be other compelling stories that people are going to tell here tonight. And the stories that people are going to tell about the problems they anticipate that kids having riding buses are not outliers. The vast majority of the students are going to have to transfer on their bus ride. They're going to be clumped onto one or two routes, and most of the rides are going to be an hour long. So I really want to urge you to try to find a way to preserve busing for our youth. And if the way to preserve busing for our middle schoolers is to go to the Pittsburgh Public School Board and talk to them about funding, I think, we as an ECS community can do that. So if that's what needs to happen, please let us know. Time is of the essence. So again, thank you for all that you do. Thank you for considering this. I know these decisions aren't easy, but I appreciate you considering it. Thanks.
So that's a question. Just curious, did you, when you looked at the transfers, did you get a sense of where the transfers are happening? Is it all Oakland or downtown or other parts of the city? Or did you not get that deep into it?
That would take a little bit more work. My suspicion is that most of them are in Oakland. The 71A, right, runs through Oakland into downtown. So certainly, my daughter's transfer would be in Oakland. I expect that's where a lot of them. I'd be happy to, look into that more.
71A was what my daughter was going to move to School Hill. It would be over by the Jacksonville. So there was transferring 71A to
Right.
the 64. So that's the 64 way on this side of town. So where I'm assuming a lot of people are on the east end, like the School Hill is across the street. That's
Yeah, and I said this in the printout, but if you're interested in looking into more details like this, please get in touch with me. My email address is on the printout there.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to have it for my time. Copy of this. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks a lot.
Any other questions?
Anybody else?
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for putting so much time into this. Next on my list is Colleen Young. Hi, Colleen. Come on up.
Hello, Julie's gone. Well, thank you, Matt, for setting that up. I did not put anywhere near as much work into what I'm going to say, and mostly because I've been out and about dealing with the response to the storm, budget reconciliation. I just got back late last night from DC, and my main thoughts are, as we look at what's happening with PRT, they have a $100 million budget deficit that they're looking at, already considering 35% fare cuts. When I look at our neighborhood, which is in Lincoln Place, we won't have any bus service at all, like zero. So my questions for you all are, as you are considering this option, which I'm not theoretically opposed to the idea of kids going on city buses, but I want to make sure that there are accessible options, right? And so for communities that don't have any buses, what does the alternative look like? For communities that may have buses, but the routing would be extremely long, or transfers would be in unsafe locations, what does the alternative look like? Is there sort of a multiple option scenario that we could create? And I also don't know whether PPS is required by law to provide some of those options for students that don't have an accessible option. So that may be part of the equation as well. if the state does not put in additional dollars into transit, these cuts are gonna happen. And when we look at the state budget, there's a likelihood it's not gonna pass on time, and that it's gonna be tied up in discussions of, potentially more than $1 billion being put towards the state to cover some cuts that are happening potentially at the federal level. So this could be a long process where we have no idea what's happening with the state budget for some time. And I just want to have a plan that sort of accounts for different scenarios, and be thoughtful about what would happen if A happens, B happens, C happens. So that we're not caught flat-footed when something blows up that we weren't expecting. So that's my basic point. And then the other thing I'll just say is, when we were making the decision about, so I have a fourth grader currently and a seventh grader. So this would directly impact for next year with the eighth grader. And, she's mature, she can ride a bus, she can do a transfer if she needs to. She would feel more comfortable if she had a friend, someone she knew to do that with, for sure. When I think about my current fourth grader, soon to be sixth grader in 2 years, I'm a little less convinced that he would be ready for that kind of an option, especially if it were more than one bus. And when we were considering whether to send my now seventh grader to ECS for middle school, she was debating, some of the more popular magnet schools in PPS. And the reason that we did not choose those is because some of the options had her doing really unsafe transfer situations at very early times in the morning, when it would be very dark, one of which was walking by herself for a quarter mile under a bridge in the dark with no sidewalk. So those are the kinds of transfers that we're looking at in some of these communities. So I just want to make sure that we're not putting kids in unsafe situations or leaving them with no alternative than having parents have to figure out, how am I going to get my kid to school when I work? So anyway, thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
Is Lee Fisher here?
Hi everyone, thanks for your time, appreciate it. I'm a parent of 2 ECS students, so a 5th grader and a 6th grader, so both would be affected by the change in busing for next year. And I wanted to speak a little bit about my experience and some of the conversations I've had with other parents that take the bus with our children. So we live in Swiss Elm Park, which is kind of East End, like near Regent Square. We're one of the last 2 stops on a bus route that starts in the South Hills, goes down Mount Washington, gets on the highway for a while, and then goes up through Sportsville and our neighborhood. And there are children that get on that bus at like 6:50 in the morning. And, even for our children, they're down on that bus for a considerable amount of time at this point. If we make this change, our children, their time on the bus probably doubles or more, and involves a transfer, potentially walking at the transfer, as well as obviously, the walk here. And in the winter and in the rain, those are going to be really challenging ways to get to school. And we are seriously considering whether, if the change is made, we will keep our children in the school. We may pull them out of ECS just because of how practically difficult it could be. I've heard the same comments. So our bus stop probably has maybe 15 ECS students. Probably about half are either in the middle school now or pretty close to middle school age. And I've heard that comment from other parents as well. I've also heard from some of the parents who have like an older child and a younger child that they may leave their 7th grader in for 8th grade. Some of them have students that are going to Costa Rica, like they have some investment, and obviously you don't want to move your kids in the middle of middle school, but that they're going to pull their younger children out rather than have them take the bus. And so I suspect that there will actually be quite a few parents that make that decision. This is obviously, an economic decision. There are certainly economic implications as well for having, quite a few children eventually leave the school, right? Especially, at least my sense is that the waiting lists for middle are not as long as it is for the younger children, the younger schools. And so, that's, I think, an important consideration, even beyond sort of like the challenges of, kids having to take these long bus rides. I'm not so concerned about the safety aspect of it. I mean, it certainly is a consideration, especially when if they're going to be transferring on the busway where they're potentially like not, in a heavily crowded area with lots of supervising adults around. Middle schoolers, their behavior can be, they're sort of in these transitional phases, right? And so having them sort of on their own is, there's some risks associated with that, I think. And so to me, there's just a lot of concerns here that I think, like I said, I think for us, we are very seriously considering whether, we really don't want to make our child leave the school. We love the schools, we've been very happy with them. But also, like, this really could be something that makes it impossible for us. And I think a thing to just keep in mind is, I know that the city, like PPS, requires middle schoolers, for the most part, to take city buses. That's actually not true for some of the kids in our neighborhood that go to Sarah. They still have busing through our neighborhood just because of how challenging it is to get to anywhere else. And it's going to get worse if we cancel all these bus routes. But a major difference with ECS is that this school services the entire city, right? So it's not, for those children that are taking buses to PPS schools, they're typically doing it like, if the school's not in their neighborhood, it's usually maybe one, sort of one neighborhood over, maybe two. This is a different situation, right? You have these kids coming from the South Hills, coming from all over the city, and I just think that the impact that you will see on these children is not the same as what you get when you have middle schoolers in PPS having to take that city bus. So appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Do we have anybody else who, I know people signed up last time, but anybody else who's here for public comment? Thank you, everybody. Just a couple of things I just want to, I'm sorry, come on up. I apologize, I didn't see it. God, your glasses. If you don't mind, just telling us your name.
Yeah, John Chin, parent of two ECS children, kindergartner and a fourth grader. So neither of which will be affected next year, but our fourth grader potentially affected in a couple of years. Also did not do as much research as we're concerned, in part doing the math, right? Our fourth grader just turned 10, so doing the math when they start 6th grade, it's probably 11. Will he be mature enough for that? It'll be a lot harder. There will be a transfer. If there's still a bus service around Greenfield, we live in Greenfield, so we've already seen signs at our bus stop about them closing this bus stop, keep this route not being the same. Obviously, you can't project out that far to really know. But it is something we thought about, and that's why we're here versus school board meeting. And it seems like, from our perspective, I mean, we don't want to blank it out or anything like that, but we have thought about what are the alternatives, right? Because if we went to, we didn't go to ECS, PPS school, well, currently it's Greenfield, which is literally just walking distance from our house, which is obviously very convenient instead of having our kid on a bus for an hour each way every day. Of course, then PPS is planning on closing schools, so our school might actually be Colfax, which is still much more convenient than going from Greenfield. And so the bus line that we're on, it starts way in the South Hills and Carrick, comes all the way through. We're one of the closer stops. So I know we're having these concerns. Can't imagine, the children that are coming in all the way to the end of the bus line, what the PRT route, how long it will take. So that wasn't planned out very well. But anyways, that's what I said. Thanks. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you. Just a couple of things I just want to say on this issue. Just to make clear, I think that this is I really appreciate everybody who spoke tonight, and I appreciate all of the feedback we've got from the community community on this particular issue. You know, and I think probably most of you, I think most everybody who spoke certainly is aware of some of the general things, but just for everybody's benefit that, you know, this is obviously something that we're taking very seriously as a board. And I want to thank Patty for teeing up the budget process, you know, early this year to give time to, you know, have community feedback and for us to gather facts. And because these are, you know, complicated times on so many levels, from a transportation perspective, from a national perspective. There's so many uncertainties and they all interlock, and we're kind of, down here having to juggle all these different uncertainties. So, but I think having a budget and there's no, you know, decision, obviously we haven't voted on the budget yet, so we're going to take all of this feedback very seriously, and we'll continue to take feedback seriously. And so, you know, I'm encouraging all members of the community to, you know, give us feedback on this, both, you know, positive, negative. Constructive is especially helpful. Certainly doing voluntary research on our behalf, I think is tremendously helpful. And you know, there's opportunities like speaking to the board. We have another meeting in actually a few weeks, and then of course the June meeting we'll be voting on the budget. So this public dialogue I think is really valuable, and it's part of our vision anyway. So I think that's really important. I know that there's been some messaging about this that's gone out to the community, with some resources and things, some information, because obviously some of these issues are complicated and not everybody is going to be able to fully understand them. I don't fully understand all of the ins and outs of how this process works, who pays for what the law is, and it's complicated, and so I encourage you to follow up with Patrick and his team. There are resources that you talk about, resources you might find helpful to sort of navigate. There are, you know, a lot of misconceptions and out there, not necessarily in this room, but certainly out in the community. So, and I think the final thing I'd like to say, and maybe others on the team might want to has other things to add, but I just want to thank everybody, especially for the constructive way in which you presented your feedback today. It's one of the things that makes me, you know, proud and happy to be part of this community where we can actually try and solve a real problem, not screaming, not yelling. I know that some of these issues are, you know, really important, and talking about kids maybe going to one school or going to another school. I think all of us really do want to do the best we can to resolve this. I just want to commend. This is a great community, so I mean that's evidence of it. So I just want to thank you again. And so I don't know if anybody else has comments or thoughts, but otherwise we can move to the next item. Patrick?
The only additional item that I think folks know, but I just want to make sure there's also a survey that we've asked people to fill out, and we have gotten some feedback, and we'll report out on that probably at the next meeting, certainly by June, if not before then. But that's been really helpful also for us to see and get good feedback from folks.
Yeah, and I do want to thank Patrick and his team. I think 3 days after Patrick was hired as the CEO, I had a meeting with him at one point, and he was already talking about buses and maps, and he loves buses, so, you know, I think he's ready enough for the job.
It's part of the job.
Yeah. And his team, I know, have been really thinking hard and working hard on all of these issues, so I want to thank them as well. But, all right, well, with that, we will continue talking about this and continue looking at feedback, and we'll move to the consent agenda. Are there any comments, questions, or discussion? Thoughts?
I have a question about the AC intermediate, still we talked about, so can we just get a quick comment about what that still entails, all the areas of servicing, because we've been trying to right size that service area.
So the contract for the intermediate school air conditioning would be for the cafe. So the idea there is to build a system that would cool that space. We have window units and other things, well, window units and floor units servicing the classroom currently. But we want to make sure we have a space that we can use in the event of particularly very hot days. And also to make sure that that space is more functional currently in the summertime or in the warm weather. When you're in that space, you have to run fans, which make it very difficult to hear. That's the place where we try to gather in that building. So it would make it a more functional space. So this is really designed to serve that space primarily. And then the goal will be to start to look at what we can do for the larger facility.
And what's the timeline for that to be installed?
We want that to be done as soon as possible so that the teachers at the intermediate school are very happy and the students as well. But I would say our goal seriously is to get that done this summer.
So not for the school.
Yeah, well, as soon as, once the board approves this, we'll be working immediately with the team to get that set up. But I think most likely it'll happen during the summer to cause the least disruption to the work of the school.
And Michelle, are you able to model in, like, just an estimate of the additional operating OpEx costs for the electricity? I think maybe just a false start, where they get adding electricity
Yes.
requirements. So,
And did you get multiple quotes for this?
So this is off of the CoStar's, the state's joint purchasing effort. So we hired this firm as a result. In fact, they put out a bid, we got them to be a part of CoStar so we can move forward with this.
Right. Any other discussion on any of these items? Or are we ready to vote? Okay. Well, I'm going to read the resolution. Resolution 2025-04-2160. Be it resolved by the Board of Trustees of the school that the consent agenda for April 2025 be approved. So I need a motion. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Okay, we'll move to item 6, which is the budget presentation.
Before I pitch it over to Michelle, I just want to, you may have noted this earlier, but we are presenting the budget a month early. And the idea there, just as we mentioned earlier, was to make sure that there's opportunity for public comment and for the board to really consider this. And Michelle has done a tremendous amount of work to, sort of really think both, about the history of our spending and our revenues and then projecting forward. And also at the same time, getting this budget delivered a month early. So I just wanted to thank her for that before I pitch it over. It's been a lot of work over the course of the year. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Michelle Resnick. I'm the CFO at ECS, and I really appreciate your engagement tonight, so thank you for being here. Before I get into the details of the budget, I wanted to kind of set the groundwork for the budget, and that it was more of a conservative budget this year. We're kind of in an uncertain time, and especially around federal dollars. There is some uncertainty around federal dollars. We don't know anything specifically, but we are definitely being mindful of that. Also, our COVID relief funding, we used all of that earlier this year, so we've had the benefit of COVID relief dollars through 2021 through 2020, earlier this year, 2024. So all of those dollars have been spent, and thank you to Dr. Cook and Dwight for making sure that we had really great plans on how to spend those dollars. But also with that, we are in a very strong financial position. So we've done excellent work over the last few years to make sure that we are in a good financial position, and we want to be mindful of our strategic decisions as we move forward and thinking about making sure that we continue to be in a strong financial position. So as we had noted earlier, the draft budget is available earlier. So today, we were hoping to have it available last week, but other nature had other plans. So here we are, so it is available. And we have through June 18th, the board of trustees will vote on the final budget on June 18th, so it's available for comment at this time. Right now, it's in each of the front offices, it's printed out on the front office desks. It's also available on our website right now, and also we have our last year's budget is available as well. If you have any questions, you can email questions to me@ecspgh.org. And also you can, feel free to provide any public comment at our next board meeting, which is coming up pretty quickly, May 21st, and then again, on June 18th. So our budget for this year, total revenue is $30,416,000, and total expenses are $30,658,000. So we have a deficit or shortfall of $242,000. And if we were to add, this budget is excluding middle school transportation for Pittsburgh Public School students that reside in that district. So if we were to add that back in, we would have a deficit of $542,000. Our revenue sources, so most, as you can see, represented in the blue part of the graph, our tuition is most of our revenue source. That is in the form of non-special ed and special ed students. Special ed represents about 40% of our tuition revenue, and 60% is non-special ed. And from a student standpoint, we are at 22% special ed population and 78% non-special ed student population. From a federal standpoint, our federal dollars represent 4% of our budget, and I will go through those details in the following slides, and also will explain how we spend those dollars. State funding represents about 1%, and that is in the form of, we have a Ready to Learn block grant. We also received some food and some money that goes towards our food service program. We also received some funding to help support our school safety coordinator, and also funding that goes towards one of our school psychologists as well. Miscellaneous in that funding that is mostly in the form of contributions towards the school. So federal funding by category. As you can see, the Title I funding is our largest funding category with $562,000. And then we have federal IDAs, the next biggest chunk of federal funding, and our federal subsidy for milk, lunch, and breakfast. And then we have Title IIA and Title IV. And again, that represents 4% of our total budget, about $1.1 million. So how do we use those funds? Title I is mostly used for our academic associate directors and directors. We also use it for some of the Title I events that we have. We have a Title I event coming up on Friday, which is our Free Fruits Fair. So hopefully many of you will be able to be there Friday, or the following Friday we have one as well. Federal IDA, so that's Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We use that money goes to support our contracted services for physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech, and we also use a portion of that to offset a school psychologist's salary. So it doesn't cover the full salary, but a portion of it. Title IIA, that is used for training for math and literacy. We also have some contracted services from a consultant standpoint that help out with that. And then Title IV is like ECS, so that helps support one of our part-time employees. It also helps replenish our bike fleet and also some maintenance for our biking program and some contracted services to help make sure that we can get kids on bikes safely. Primary school enrollment, as you can see, we have a lower kindergarten numbers, and that's because we have 3 classes of 25 in kindergarten. We are constrained by space at this time at the primary school. First and second grade, we open up an additional classroom in first grade, so we add, so there are 4 classes of 26. So our total primary school enrollment is 283. In intermediate school, so that's our 3rd and 5th grade students. You'll notice that we have a few extra students. 3rd and 5th, we have 106 and 105, and that is because we have some students that are at an improved private school. they are getting the services that they need at those schools, so, services that ECS is not able to provide in the house. Their total enrollment is 315. And middle school, our sixth grade, we have 112, and then seventh and eighth grade is at 105, and that is our sixth grade is a little bit higher with the intention of not, if we have some movement, we're not backfilling that seventh and eighth grade. So our total enrollment is 322 at the middle school. And then again, we have some space constraints at the high school. We are near max enrollment at the high school. We are not at quite max, but we're very close to it. So, 9th and 10th grade, you can see we're 60, 66 students in those two grades. And then 11th and 12th are lower, and that was when we were starting the program. And also we don't have students in 11th grade and 12th grade. So we're at 200 students for high school. And then total enrollment, so primary school was 283, intermediate 315, middle school 322, and high school at 200. The total projected enrollment of 1,120, and then our total budgeted enrollment is 1,090, and that is to account for any movements or any fluctuations in tuition rates. So staffing by buildings, I wanted to, our biggest revenue generator was our tuition, but then from an expense standpoint, we have our staff. So that represents well over 70% of our budget is spent on the amazing staff that we have at ECS. So at our primary school, in each of our buildings, we have a principal and an assistant principal. So that's pretty consistent throughout. And then we have 3 special ed teachers, one for each grade at the primary. And then teachers, that bucket includes our grade level teachers and also our specialist teachers. And then in each classroom, we have either an assistant teacher or a paraeducator along with a teacher. And then our special ed education paraeducators, that's to provide additional supports for students that need it. And then in each building, we have a nurse, a social worker, and a counselor. So our total staff at the primary school is 42. And then the intermediate school looks pretty consistent with the addition of, we have that additional classroom. So that the primary school is short in kindergarten, so we have 4 classes of 26 at each grade. So we have that additional teacher, and we do have an additional special ed teacher. In the audit, also notes that we have a school psychologist available as well. So our total at the intermediate school is 44. And then at the middle school, you'll notice in our administrators line, we have a dean of students. So also principal, assistant principal, and a dean of students. You'll notice an increase in our special education teachers, and our teachers is at 29, and that includes grade level teachers and a lot of specialists. We expanded the specialist offerings at the middle school. And then it's pretty consistent with the other schools, except we have a building monitor at this school as well. High school, again, principal, assistant principal. But one thing I do want to point out is that at the high school, we have an additional counselor. So they're consistent with our other buildings. We have a nurse, a social worker, 2 counselors, and a school psychologist, and also a building monitor at that school as well. So total staff at the high school is 43. So this slide shows our total enrollment by building and then staffing at each of the buildings. So we're at total projected enrollment again at 1,120, and total staff, student-facing staff is 182. And our enrollment that we budgeted is 1,090. So district curriculum team, we have our Dr. Randy Kritz and executive directors, we have 3 of them. Directors, special ed, and STEM, and associate directors, we have 7, and our gifted teacher for the district, and the student services administrator. Operations, we have Dr. Dowd, myself, we have 6 directors, enrollment, our family engagement director, communications, our food service director, and human resources. administrative managers, we have in finance, facilities, our data manager, food service, and athletics. Coordinators includes data, clubs, and communication, we have recruitment, we have some school programming that's included in that as well, our security coordinator, and our ECS program. And also our custodian team, our food service team, our technology team, and senior office manager and transportation coordinator, and our office managers at each of the buildings. That staffing total is 48. This graph is showing our historical revenue and expense trends. So you'll see that in 2018, our total revenue was 11.8 million, and our student enrollment was 634. In 2024, we have grown to a budget of 28 million and 1,016 students. We have done a lot of growing over the last few years, and you can see by looking at the trend lines that our revenues have mostly, we've been increasing our expenses closely. We've done a really good job of monitoring our budget. So this slide is backing out the impact of COVID relief funds. So this kind of is becoming closely monitoring our operational trends, and you can see that the revenue and expenses are closing in. So this is backing out the COVID relief offsets that we received. The next few slides, next three slides, I'll go through our expense allocation. So I want to be really mindful of how we are allocating our expenses within our budget. I really want to point out that the salary and wages, the blue portion of the circle graph will show that our salary and wages, this represents our student-facing population of our staff. And then you'll note that in the green portion of the graph, that's representing administrative staff, and also that includes home office. So you'll notice that salary and wages over time for the blue portion increases. The administrative and overhead does decrease over time. And facilities expense is noted as the yellow orange section of the graph. And then we have our transportation, which is 11%, and also curriculum. Our transportation is 3%, and curriculum is the 11%. And those remain like fairly consistent. As you'll notice, so salaries and wages for our instructional staff is increasing to 64, and then for 2024 to 68. So I typically don't go through our 5-year projections going forward. I typically talk about our next year's budget, but we are at a point where we need to think about some strategic decisions. And you can see in the red portion of this graph that our expenses are outpacing our revenue. Definitely have been conservative in the revenue projections, but we are in some uncertain times. So I will continue to monitor those projections and update them as needed. But you'll see in 2026 is where we start to the expenses and revenue start to grow. As I noted, 2025 and 26, we are projecting a slight deficit, but as we move forward, yes, we have to figure. The numbers that represents our bolded projections as we move forward. So when we get to 29, 30, we're around 1,200, and we are in our maximum moment, so we need to be mindful of that. So the steps recommended to control costs and increase our revenues, as we had noted previously, we recommending that we transition middle school students from ES to PRT buses. That is a savings of around $300,000 for this year and as we move forward, because that cost will continue to increase. Also recommend a modification to non-union salary scales. So non-union salaries will continue to go up. However, the increase or recommending a smaller increase. So when we look at it, we would in line with our tuition growth. And then we are also receiving our ECS insurance plans, so we're hoping that by doing that, we will see it'll be less than the district budget as our ECS insurance offerings. And revenue taxes, we have applied for E-rate, which is a state offering, and are anticipating that we will see some revenue offsets there. We have not put those in the budget because we don't know what those amounts are, and it's definitely not beneficial. So, we show and we've also applied for education improvement tax credit program, also not aware of what that offset would be, so that is also not factored into the budget. Just a reminder that the budget is available now through June 18th. I'm happy to take any questions now, or if you have any questions that you'd like to email at media@ECS and then the budget will be reviewed and approved at the June 18th. Thank you.
Appreciate what do that, especially getting early in this discussion. Any questions?
Yeah, could you remind me how you did the 5-year revenue projections? What were the, is that including additional students in the new high school capacity came in, or not? It is, but the ramp-up was not. Yeah, it's okay, so it's including a ramp, but not full capacity. Yes.
And I'll just say that, we've included costs for that for this budget year. We're working hard on that, we'll have more to report in the upcoming meeting, but we're working hard on that, we believe that's going to be an important part of the story.
Just wondering if there's some kind of creative middle ground with the transportation idea, like, for example, let's say we identify the students that are not going to have a bus, like there's no public bus available, and we can get PBS to still pay for those students, and then we identify the students that don't need to transfer, they can get a direct bus here. Is there ways to think about a lesser budget cut where we are providing buses to some students, realizing, it wouldn't be even, but maybe just a middle ground to maybe think about?
I think we're at this point, we put this out so we can have comments and hear feedback and thoughts on that. So I think we're open to any sort of suggestions and thoughts. I will say though that the cost that we've incurred, right, is not a cost that we can continue to pay for over time. So we are going to have to figure that out. And it's also important to know we're only providing for a specific set of students. It's admittedly, our charter comes to Pittsburgh Public Schools, it's our home district, so that's important. But there are other students, as some of the speakers pointed out, that come to ECS who would rightfully potentially ask, why are we getting transportation? So the other concern is that cost would go up if we're thinking about it from an equity standpoint. So there are, I think, a lot of different factors that we have to consider. You guys ultimately will make that decision. I'm happy to help and inform that as best we can. And I think we're definitely interested in hearing any thoughts and ideas about that. And one last thing about the transportation, we can talk more, I think. What's that?
I was asking if you wanted me to make a comment as far as that is concerned with not, if they don't have a bus.
Yeah, feel free, go for it.
Okay, so the way that works, if there was a student, a PBS student, where the PRT no longer had an accessible route, PBS has no choice but to provide a yellow school bus for that. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Now, the part that you're talking about as far as if a student has to transfer or something like that, would that cut the cost? That would not cut the cost, because when we pay for transportation, it's not per student, it's just one bulk cost. and you can't divvy it up per student. Rather, it's, oh, well, we're only going to put 5 on from this bus or the 5 from this area or whatever the case may be. We get a set cost, and that's the cost that we have to pay the bus company.
But again, this is opportunity for people to provide the kind of input we receive this evening.
What is the, do you know, like, what the criteria exactly is for not having a bus? Like, you know, in theory, right, you could walk 5 or 10 miles and get a bus, or you could walk 50 feet and get a bus.
Just want a point of order.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just don't want to get too off track, because I don't want to be so close. But happy to talk. No, it's not your fault. It starts to feel like it's an interesting discussion, it's an important discussion, but I just want to make sure we stay moving.
Okay, to that point, so we are also having, and Kristen's here, we're having a PCO meeting on Friday, and this is a chance for folks also, we'll be happy to talk about this at that time, and we can set up other times as well.
Yeah, no, yeah, like I said, we really do want to hear from everybody, and I really appreciate everything, but I just want to make sure we are staying in order here. Yeah, I guess that was one of my questions, and maybe this was time to sort of answer this to some extent, but along the lines of what you were saying, Adam, I mean, even just for, there's a way to bridge students who are here, who have relied on this, who, you know, it's one thing, again, you always are anything, how to treat somebody differently, maybe, but bridging students who are already existing students, and not having to switch schools midstream, you know, that's obviously complicated. I have no answer, but, you know, in a small way, you know, I don't know if you can do that. I guess maybe you don't think that, but something we can keep looking at, maybe. Any other thoughts, comments on the budget generally? We have one question on the federal funds. I think the federal funds is titled 1, 2A, 4. I assume those are all essentially earmarked for different purposes. So 5 law, right? It can only be sort of used for a limited number of things. Okay, and obviously we don't know what the status of that federal funding is at this point. It was something to continue, but.
I don't know, we are assuming it in the budget, so that we're assuming it exists, but we also are trying to, this is what I keep saying, ECS has a mission, we have values, we're a community, we're not changing our work, and we're going to continue to go forward doing that work. And I think part of what we're trying to do in this budget, as Michelle said, is be more conservative. And no one wants to be that way, but I think the other thing is there may come a point where we're going to have to make some hard choices. If the federal government changes, as there is discussion, the reimbursement rate for food, just to pick one example, that could have a pretty substantial impact on our work here, and we would have to figure out how to cover those costs. Or we could have to figure out how to cut different things, whether it's programs or positions. And our goal in this budget is actually to make sure that we are putting together a conservative budget and that we have the flexibility to the extent that we can build it in to make sure that we are not having to make any significant difficult changes, particularly mid-year during the school year. So we are factoring it into the budget, but we are also being very mindful of the fact that something is going to or potentially may happen. And we want to be in a position where we can react without having to jettison things.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's really important, and I especially appreciate that you talked about something that doesn't always factor in these conversations about conservative budgets and the need for doing so, which I think is in the current environment very important. But it's looking at not just cuts, but other revenue sources, which I think is, the E-rate program, which again, I hope we are able to get. I mean, that's a terrific thing to locate and apply for, and and, I think the other revenue sources that you said, I mean, I think that's, something that's easily forgotten, and so I think that's a really important part. Obviously, it's not the whole solution to all this, but, if you don't have that, then you're lost, so I appreciate that. All right. Any other questions, comments, thoughts, board? All right, thank you. Thank you very much for getting this to us. We have a lot to talk about, a lot to think about, a lot more here in the community, I'm sure. So, and I'm looking forward to it because I think it's really important. So, okay. Okay, item 7. We have another resolution here regarding well, why don't I just read it? We'll kind of discuss it. The resolution is 2025-04-2163. Be it resolved by the Board of Trustees of the school that authorizes the Chief Executive Officer, Patrick Dow, to sign electronically any annual contracts, agreements, grants, and licenses with the Pennsylvania Department of Education. And do you want to give us some context, Patrick?
Yeah, I'd rather not do that. But Dwight Loftman will be, he's still working with us in a reduced capacity, but he will be retiring at the end of the school year officially. And Dwight's been signing a lot of the stuff. And so we're in the process, and Dwight's been doing, as I've reported to the board, a lot of our reporting, particularly for compliance work. And so we've been in the process basically since I got here, sort of making that transition. Dwight's been here for a long time, and he's done a lot of this one, all of this work. It's been really important. We have now many people doing this work, but we need somebody to sign the stuff. And so that's what we're asking for, so that I can be a person to sign these things on the state portal. You want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's also, for example, Title I and Title IIA, right? So we have to provide what we're doing to the state and be approved for how we're spending those dollars. And our strategic framework and our strategic plan has to go through the state. It's called comprehensive plan for PDE. So that also has to be approved. Our gifted education plan, our special education plan, our professional development plan. There's a lot of safety. So there's a lot of these plans that have to be approved by the state. And part of that is our goal is to have the Chief Executive Officer sign them before they get it in place.
Seems like a good person.
Yeah.
Perfect. So that those funds, the Title I and IIA, they flow through the state or administered by the state.
Well, we have to like attest to how we're using them and then, yeah.
With the recent report or the recent discussion that we had about the verification that we were complying with the Constitution, that was part of that.
Right. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments before we vote on this? Okay.
My only comment though is, does it have to be named specifically here, or should we just be approving as Chief Executive Officer?
No, it needs to be
It needs to
named,
be very
and
named.
it needs to be approved by the board. We need to be able to
Just
point
wanted
to
to-
the minutes that the
wanted to
name's
check.
there and you guys say yes.
Okay, understood.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Do I have a motion? Motion? Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thanks, everybody. We already voted on the other part of item 7. So that takes us into our committee reports. I don't have a particular executive committee report. A couple of things that I will, some executive committee have something that they want to say. I'm happy to deal with my time. I just want to say just 2 things quickly. One is, this is just kind of a point of order, but we'll get to. The water policy is on the agenda, but we're not going to be voting on it tonight. Still going to have some more discussion and some work to be done before we put it up for a vote, probably at the next meeting. So I just want to point that out. and just for expectations. The other thing, I just want to say this because I didn't have a chance to say it earlier, but I just want to thank our team and thank the board and thank everyone here. I know that the last week has been difficult. We've had some difficult weeks before, but I know this last one was difficult, and especially having to move the meeting and all the logistics. And so I just want to just give a shout out and appreciation from myself and from the board. But I also want to thank the board members for being flexible and getting over here. And all the things that you guys have been dealing with for the last week and probably continue to deal with. So thank you for that. But with that, we have that's all I have. Does anyone else, executive committee, have anything you want to throw out there? Okay. We have a governance committee report today, Dave, or anybody? Okay. I see head shaking, so I'm going to assume that's a no. All right.
I just make a couple governance comments.
Sure.
Just a couple of things to consider here. The first one is that we do need to come up with an executive slate for the next school year. So if anyone is interested in having an executive role, president, vice president, etc., start to think about that and make it known to the rest of us. Other thing I think is probably just worth pondering a little bit here is that we kind of have a goal on this board of having an even number of parents and non-parents. We used to have kind of more strict requirements in the bylaws about the number, but we got rid of that because it was very hard to maintain it as people came and went. But I do think we are starting to skew pretty heavily towards the non-parents, and maybe something to think about moving forward as we bring on or consider new members, because it's getting somewhat imbalanced. So I guess as we think about that, if anyone knows of a parent who would have a particular skill set that could lend to this board, or anyone out there listening has an interest in it, I think we need to think about that.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate that. I know Jill isn't here today, but I think she did send something, and I think maybe did she do something?
Yeah.
Or did you have something?
Yeah, I can cover a couple highlights. It was over a month ago, so some of it might be a little outdated, so I'll try and kind of refresh maybe the key points. I think the major ones were just planning for graduation and just thinking about, I believe we have our first student graduating who's been with ECS since kindergarten. And we also had some thinking about special education requirements for those that might be staying on up until the 21-year-old requirement for special education. They were coming up with a flexible instruction plan for remote learning days. That was something that was coming up in the next meeting or so, I believe. Looking at a comprehensive literacy plan for middle school for how are we continuing the focus areas of vocabulary and word work, writing, reading comprehension, and then stronger interventions at tier 2 and tier 3. And then PSSA's work, I think pretty much the main topic at that point. Certainly feel free to add in anything else that I missed.
Yeah, I can just add that thank you to the educators for also being flexible with PSSA. So we ran into a bit of the snag with the weather. And so we did have to push back our science PSSA. So they just wrapped up, so everyone is aware. We had to, the state was allowing everyone an extension in those, so we did not fall out of compliance with PSSA, so we were working over that. But they're all done. They're now trying to wrap up all of the makeup testing. So another year of testing for K-8 is done, and our keystones will start. So they will be May 12th, 13th, and 14th. So our high school teachers are ramping up for those testing dates. And then the other one to just keep in mind is that our PPS audit is on May 19th. And so I'll be able to share a little bit more about that later. But as a kind of positive note, our Green Roots Fair, I would suggest anyone can come to that. It's kind of a time for us to highlight what makes ECS ECS. And so not just our standardized testing and what we're doing academically, but the fact that we think because we tie what we're doing in so well to the natural development social environment, kids will be more engaged in our academic scores will go up from that. So if you're in the area for K5 or 612, 2 weekends in a row will be a good time.
Finance and Facilities Committee report?
Yeah, so I apologize for not being here in person. I've been on the board call since this beginning. I was racing down 376 from the airport with a screaming baby in the back. The audio is great. I want to just say that I heard every single word of everything that happened, so kudos to you. I don't know, yeah, this is great. I heard every single thing. But there you go. It was great. But still, finance facilities report, essentially everything that's presented from the budget today, the transportation conversation, and also the contracts and invoices has been deliberated and talked about, and will continue to be talked about in the finance facility report. We went back and forth with Michelle and Patrick on suggestions that we had on the budget and the modeling as well. I want to give Michelle a lot of credit for putting that all together and dealing with us and our questions. We are not an easy group, but we welcome all the comprehensive responses from the public comment. These are things that definitely go into the deliberations and talk about. So yeah, this is ongoing, and thanks to anybody, and for any board members that do want to join, just to see what the magic is all about, let me know. We can get in on those pieces.
Perfect. Thanks, Rohit. We have a ECSFT report today.
It's short. All right, ECSFT would like to thank the PCO for the Teacher Appreciation Gifts, Teacher Appreciation Week. We would also like to give a nod to the ECS administration for how they handled the storm power outages and building closures. We appreciate the continuous communication and consistency across all the buildings, as well as the regard for potential impact on students and staff. We would also like to voice our continued support for our para-educators as they continue to negotiate their first union contract. Thank you.
Can I just say, I want to say, as a parent, I attended my first showcase this week, the first grade showcase, and I wanted to say how impressive it was to view that 100 first graders stand on stage, 45 minutes, all quiet except for when they're singing. I can't believe it. Like, it was really awesome.
I would pass along, I work at the high school. And we cannot get them to stand still. So I'll pass along to the lower schools.
I don't think I saw PCO.
I just looked at, I didn't see my phone remarks.
Okay, all right, so.
I mean, I think the thing I would just like to say, it's already been said, that the PCO has done a great job putting together appreciation for the team here, which has been awesome. And then again, they have their meetings on Friday, and part of the discussion will be around the transportation question. And not just, sort of answering questions, but also sort of thinking about some of the options that parents and students, brought up this evening.
Okay, terrific. For our next meeting. Okay, so moving on to number 8, policies. As I said, we're not going to vote on the lottery policy tonight. So the one policy we do have before us for consideration is the policy 212, which is the hearing officer policy. Does anybody have any comments, questions, want to discuss before we vote? Okay, I will read it. Resolution 2025-04-2161, be it resolved by the Board of Trustees of the school that the policy 212 hearing officer be approved as amended. Do I have a motion? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Okay, so moving on, I guess we're at the executive session, so before we go to executive session, let's thank everybody for being here tonight. And yes, with that, I will ask for a motion to go into executive session. Second. All in favor? Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.